Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Mike Elko, the Texas A&M Aggies, staying extremely active in the transfer portal, landing multiple commitments throughout the weekend. Now, about 24 hours ago, we updated on some of the transfer portal commitments that we saw. I mean, it seems like we're doing daily episodes on the Texas A&M Aggies and what they're doing in the transfer portal. I want to talk about a few commitments that really stood out to me for Texas A&M, and again, a program that I am such a big fan of what Coach Mike Elko is doing in the portal. Like, when you brought in Mike Elko, you knew he was a calculated guy. I mean, he took the first couple of weeks, evaluated in the transfer portal, evaluated what he had in this Texas A&M roster. In the last couple of days, you're seeing him get extremely active in locking down the commitments that are going to make this team better in 2024. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a shout out to the Texas A&M Aggie fans. This has been a program that's been a blast to talk about. Many of you guys know I love talking roster construction and how coaches go about building rosters. And Mike Elko, I think, is one of the best in the business. We've been talking a ton about this program. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys. If you guys do enjoy the content, you enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into some of the commitments that really stood out for me for Texas A&M. And I want to start with the most recent one, and Elijah Alston coming from Marshall. You take a look at what he did in 2023, 11 and a half tackles for a loss, 6 sacks. But when you dig deeper into the numbers, that's where you really start to get a sense of why Mike Elko wanted to bring Elijah Alston into this defensive line. One, you're just adding depth to this unit. And Mike Elko knows more than anybody, especially winning in the SEC, you have to have the trenches figured out. And that doesn't just mean a starting 4 set on the defensive line. You have to have multiple guys that you can rotate in and out throughout 12 games of a season, throughout a duration of 4 quarters. Elijah Alston, whether he starts for Texas A&M, whether he is a rotational piece, is going to be a very solid football player for Texas A&M in 2024. You look at the deeper numbers, an 18.6% pass rush win rate, extremely high. That's about the number you see for guys going to the NFL. You see 22 quarterback hurries. But the thing I love most about Elijah Alston, and a very similar conversation we had with former Purdue defensive lineman Nick Skirton, is these guys are really good pass rushers. They're also extremely good against the run. Elijah Alston, 21 run stops during his 2023 season with Marshall. His average depth of tackle, 1.2 yards down the field. And that's a number that I really do enjoy looking at when I evaluate defensive linemen. Are they winning at the line of scrimmage? Are they stacking, shedding blocks, and making their plays at or behind the line of scrimmage? And Elijah Alston making his plays only 1 yard down the field, that tells you that he's winning at the point of attack. He's getting off blocks and making his plays at the line of scrimmage. And that's what you want from your defensive line. And you look at Mike Elko and his strategy and how he wants to play defense. He wants to win on 1st and 2nd down, stopping the run, and then bring some pressure on 3rd and long. And that's like a very good recipe for Mike Elko and his time as a defensive coordinator and his time leading that Duke team as well. But you want to see that get brought to Texas A&M. A really big fan of what Mike Elko is doing in the transfer portal. And again, it's not necessarily the splash he gets, but it's guys that are getting this team better heading into that 2024 year. The next guy I want to talk about, and a really interesting name for Texas A&M fans to keep in mind, is Scooby Williams, coming over from the Florida Gators. And this is a guy that struggled at that off-ball linebacker spot for Florida in 2023. He was missing some tackles. He was kind of blowing some assignments. The thing I am most intrigued about Scooby Williams, and I think a lot of Florida Gator fans will tell you this, it seemed like he was playing out of position, right? He's 6'2", 230 pounds, was thought to be an edge rusher prospect coming out of high school. They stick him in that off-ball linebacker spot, and I think, one, he was still learning that position. He was primarily rushing the passer coming out of high school. So there's 2 things I look at it. One, you could potentially see a position change and put Scooby Williams, who was a former top 50 national prospect, at that edge position and see him have a lot of success there. Or you're patient with a guy like Scooby Williams and you recognize that he was new to that off-ball linebacker spot. And Jay Bateman wouldn't have brought him in from Florida if he had not thought that Scooby Williams had some juice, right? Jay Bateman saw all of Scooby Williams in practice, Saw him in all 12 games for the Florida Gators last year. I mean, if Jay Bateman didn't think Scooby Williams was a good football player, wasn't going to add value to this Texas A&M team, he would have just said, hey, we're not going to touch him out of the transfer portal. The fact that Jay Bateman knows Scooby Williams as well as he does and goes out and gets him, I think is really intriguing from a point that, hey, we think he can be a really good off-ball linebacker, or we think he could be a really good edge rusher, and you might see a position change for Scooby Williams. This is a guy that, again, a rougher 2023 season as he was learning that off-ball linebacker position. I think you could see Scooby Williams really take some strides in 2024 with Texas A&M. The next guy I want to talk about it, and going back to the trenches here, Armaj Reed-Adams. And this is a guy that intrigues me for a couple different reasons. One, you look at that Kansas offense last year, and one of the things I loved most is they were one of the best rushing attacks that you saw in all of college football. And that was something that Texas A&M really struggled with. And I think a lot of it had to do with the development on the offensive line not really being there. And a guy like Armaj Reed-Adams is a hammer in the run game. He's a big body that can move people around. One of the biggest failures, I think, of Jimbo Fisher's tenure was sticking with Steve Adazio and not getting that offensive line where it needed to be. You have an extremely talented running back room. You add a guy like E.J. Smith from Stanford, obviously the former son of Emmitt Smith. Reuben Owens, I think, is going to be extremely special. If you give those running backs some space, like, they're going to have a very strong run game. And you bring in a guy like Armaj Reed-Adams, who's played at a high level in a very good rushing attack for Kansas, and it could maybe get that run game going a little bit more. And another thing that stood out for me is he's a good pass protector, right? 281 pass blocking opportunities, only 10 quarterback hurries, started all 12 games, but played 9 of them at guard and played another 3 at right tackle. So you're getting a little position versatility. And when you're trying to build depth on the offensive line, having guys that can play multiple different positions is absolutely massive. And a guy like Armaj Reed-Adams can come in and be a stopgap starter at the tackle spot if you need him. But I think he's going to be a really good interior offensive lineman for Texas A&M. And the last guy I want to talk about, and you're really starting to see a type for Mike Elko and this defensive staff as they're evaluating the cornerbacks. They want long physical cornerbacks that are athletic on the boundary, right? We talked about it with a guy like Donovan Sanders or with a guy like Will Lee coming from Kansas State. BJ Mays, kind of a very similar prospect coming from UAB. And you look at what he did in 2023, saw 48 targets, only gave up 25 catches, had 2 interceptions, 12 forced incompletions, was one of the better cornerbacks at that group of 5 level. And you suddenly look at the competition and depth you have in that cornerback room. I think you're so excited about it. That's something that Texas A&M just didn't have last year, right? The transfer portal additions that Texas A&M made at that cornerback spot. A guy like Sam McCall, who is extremely inexperienced, didn't play much for Texas A&M. Tony Grimes, obviously, just a miss there. You're suddenly looking at this cornerback room and saying 2023, it was thin. There wasn't a ton of competition. And quite frankly, it just wasn't that talented of a position group. And now you look at what it could look like in 2024 with guys like Will Lee and Donovan Sanders and BJ Mays coming in. This is a group that is extremely competitive. And I think you're going to have like that competition. That's only going to elevate everybody in that room. You have depth, you have competition. I expect that cornerback room to be massively improved heading into 2024. And again, Mike Elko, that is one of the positions that he really thrives in terms of how he evaluates out of the high school ranks and how he evaluates out of the transfer portal. Had a ton of success going to the transfer portal and getting cornerbacks at Duke that came in and were all ACC kind of guys for the Duke Blue Devils in 2023. I expect the same thing for Texas A&M under Mike Elko as well. It doesn't sound like we're slowing down. There's a lot more commitments that I think we'll have to be talking about, but I want to end with how big of a fan I am of what Mike Elko is doing. And again, these aren't necessarily the flashiest hires or flashiest lands in the transfer portal, but you dig into all of these guys and they've played really high levels of college football. They either played really well or have the potential to be really good football players. And Mike Elko, one of the best in the business at evaluating out of the transfer portal, bringing guys in, you kind of trust in the process. And this is a roster that I think from a health standpoint, it's just a healthy roster with a ton of depth and a ton of competition heading into 2024. You know the player development is certainly going to be there. Texas A&M fans, a ton of exciting moves. We'll continue to break it down. Can't thank you guys enough for all the support you guys have shown. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.